welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Dez. I'm a life coach for a woman who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a therapist, and I'm all about helping as many people as possible to build awareness and make meaningful changes in their lives. I'm also dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing access to mental health care.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Dez.
I'm Tammy.
And today we are kicking off a bit of a series with a special guest. We have Joey Vitale, right? Vitale?
Yeah, that's it.
Vitale. Perfect. And we're talking about entrepreneurship and mental health stories. I met Joey at the Badassery book launch and he shared his story and I was like, you have to come on. But before we get into the mental health piece, tell us a bit like who you are, what you do, all that really good fun stuff.
Sure. So again, thank you guys for having me on. This is great. So my name is Joey Vitale. I'm a business owner, like I think a lot of your followers and listeners are. And I just happen to also be a lawyer who helps other businesses. So I help validated and thriving business owners just put foundational legal protections in place for their business. I started my firm, Indie Law, about 2 years ago.
Nice.
And a year before that, I never thought I'd run my own business. Didn't know who Gary Vaynerchuk was, wasn't familiar with anything related to entrepreneurship. And so learned a lot super quickly. It's so much fun being in this entrepreneur space. But like we'll get into, it's I think there's a lot that is not talked about in this space. And it's awesome that you guys are highlighting these issues.
Well, one thing that I was so kind of impressed with and fell in love with when we first met was the like you're open with your story with mental health as an entrepreneur. And it's, for one, I don't like making like gender generalizations, but to see a guy being so open was amazing and in such an authentic way. And I was hoping you could kind of give us kind of the broad story of your experience moving into entrepreneurship and when you kind of like realize that it's, I don't want to say realize it's a lot harder than it may seem, but also I feel like that was kind of the experience you had.
Yeah. So I really do have like so much respect and sympathy for so many human beings in general, but specifically entrepreneurs that do have anxiety and depression as struggles that they have to deal with. And when I started out, I very, very fortunately did not have those issues. And I've always been kind of a glass half full kind of guy. And the idea of health and wellness was something that I was like, yeah, that's cool to be aware of, but like, I'm going to be fine.
Yeah, sure.
Like, cool story, but I got this.
Yeah. And I eventually realized like, I can't think that way. And so about a year into my business, when I was neck deep in the problem of having clients, managing clients, and finding other clients, to keep the business going, I kind of out of the blue had a panic attack. And that panic attack was actually caused by a number of things. I'm still not like a textbook, whatever. Like my doctors are like, we still don't know what's wrong with you.
Sure.
But I, part of it was induced by stress. Part of it was induced by a wrong medication that I was on. And it led me in the hospital for 2 weeks. And during those 2 weeks, the first couple of days I was completely unconscious. When I finally came to, I was, worried about myself, worried about my family. And then I remember remembering about my business. And I was like, oh shoot, like I didn't tell my clients I would be gone. Like there's no out of office email. I don't know how to handle the fact that I have clients that I'm serving that I can't serve right now. And
Yeah.
like, what is the strategy if something were to happen to me?
Mhm.
And a lot of those kind of what ifs that business owners are kind of told you need to have this kind of stuff in place, but we all kind of say we don't really need it. Like,
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
just stuck in, okay, how can I make this work?
Mhm.
And luckily, the situation figured itself out. My clients were amazing, but I learned that, like, if that could happen to me, like, everybody is just one day or like freak accident away from having this be a huge problem for your business.
Mhm.
And so, one of my biggest lessons that I learned from that was that in order for my business to succeed and be sustainable, I had to put myself first. And
Mhm.
like I said, I am fortunate enough to not have those burdens of severe anxiety or depression. But I mean, entrepreneurship got to me, and I was going months without eating lunch, without drinking nearly enough water. And I
Mhm.
think that a lot of business owners can really relate to that when they get started.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, I was gonna ask, in the maybe days or weeks leading up to the panic attack, did you do you feel like looking back now, there were any sort of warning signs that something was kind of brewing?
Not really. I think it was, you know how when you have like a serious deadline you have to meet, or like something's coming up,
Mhm.
and then your body starts to feel sick, but you don't get sick until you're done with the thing. And
Mhm.
then all of
Absolutely.
a sudden,
Yep.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of what happened to me. So we were right on like the year anniversary of the firm starting.
Mm.
And I had all of these kind of end of the year goals that I was so
Yeah.
close to
Yeah.
meeting. And like there was so much focus on hitting those goals. And I think right after I put in the work to kind of say, like, hooray, we did it, we closed the year on these terms,
Mhm.
my body just kind of had a crash after
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
huge high.
So there were some signs, but you were like, what I kind of heard is there were some signs, but you were like, I just got to work through this. I can do it. And when I get to the end, I can kind of get a break. I think we can all kind of relate to that story,
Mhm.
right? And then
Yeah.
your body got there and was like, nope,
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah,
so done.
this idea of like I will be able to catch up on sleep later. I
Yeah.
Yeah.
can eat later. I'm gonna be fine. I pulled all-nighters in college before. This is kind of the same thing,
Mhm.
but it's not.
Yeah.
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 I feel like our bodies have this really sneaky way of getting what they need and telling
Yeah.
us of all of those things. I spoke about it a couple episodes ago where I was pushing a lot of like stress and emotions down until like one thing happened and I was just like I was done. Like completely lost it for like 24 hours. And
Mhm.
my body was like, "No, you have to do this. You have to experience these pieces and then we can move on."
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So I really think that that's a common piece, but then so many people feel like, well, now I'm weak or now like who am I to let my business just kind of like go to by the wayside for even a day. You know, like I think that as entrepreneurs there's this whole other piece and you kind of touched on it when you were sharing your story of like the added burden of well I'm dealing with this and I kind of like I left my business which then reflects on me as a business owner, you know, like it's so multifaceted
Yeah.
and it's I don't know, it it's hard and I feel like there are conversations where as entrepreneurs we have these conversations in like I don't want to say like back rooms and dark alleys, but like we go out to bars and we loosen up and kind of talk about it. But those aren't the conversations that are really hitting like mainstream discussion.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I think it's really hard because on the one hand, like in order for your business to succeed, you do have to push yourself beyond what you thought you
Mm-hmm.
could do.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard to start and maintain a successful business,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a lot of work.
Yes.
But being able to put boundaries around that and have a blend and say I'm going to be taking priorities here and here is really hard. And one conversation that I'm not seeing happen enough is, and I think you guys, especially kind of on like the consulting side of this, have an interesting issue here where there are some entrepreneurs who I think would be a lot happier if ultimately they decide to exit out of this entrepreneur game. And
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
being an entrepreneur isn't for everybody, and
Mhm.
deciding to close shop or to turn it back into a side hustle or to go back to a 9 to 5, like, it's not a sign of failure.
Mhm.
And like, however you get like a sense of fulfillment and like money that makes like that can pay the bills, but also you're allowing to like make yourself work. I work with so many creative entrepreneurs that are much more creative minded and in love with the craft of what they're doing
Yeah.
Mhm.
versus running the business part of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them are struggling because they're slowly realizing they don't actually want to run a business because it's making them hate this hobby that they have,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but they feel reluctant to say no because they've already decided to do this. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think about therapists. Like, there are therapists who work in hospitals and therapists who go into private practice, but then they get into private practice and they're like, oh, I just wanted to do therapy. I don't want to run a business. I don't want to
Mhm.
have to talk to my clients about billing. I don't want to have to
Right.
do this with insurance. And so being able to admit that to yourself, though, and say, okay, well, maybe I'm a better fit here working in community mental health or here working in this agency can feel like failure. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of growth and personal work that you have to do around like reframing that and thinking about what that really means and maybe redefining. I know Des and I have talked about this, redefining what you consider success.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
And this is something that I actually have just been thinking about a lot this past week, just from personal experience in terms of a couple opportunities have presented themselves where it wouldn't necessarily be with myself as in an entrepreneurial role. And I mean, that comes up as like reviewing identity and everything. And the points that you brought up in terms of, do I love this? How am I feeling fulfilled? All of those things. Like, I'm looking at this opportunity and I think because I've done the work, I don't feel like a failure for being like, I'm moving into this role. But I
Yeah.
mean, I've also, like, I come from a therapy background and I have
Right.
Tammy to like challenge me on that stuff. But, and I think it's so amazing that you bring it up because it was a conversation I wanted to open up and I was planning on talking with Tammy about a podcast on this like very same thing of having a job from someone else, like by someone else, doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't make you a failure as an entrepreneur, even.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I think I think there's been this pendulum swing of from corporate to entrepreneurship, and I think we're going to find we all kind of not we all rest in the middle, but there may be a trend to land in the middle in terms
Right.
of side hustles and diversified businesses and
Right.
diversified incomes in a way we haven't seen before where yeah I'm working part-time with this company and I'm doing this as a side hustle and I'm doing the X Y and Z as well. And
Yeah.
I think this idea of like full-time business owner entrepreneurship, it's 100% not for everybody.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just like he was
Mhm.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's really good bringing up like the diversified piece, because I think that's something that people, I think you're right. I think they're starting to realize that you don't have to choose between one or the other.
Mhm.
And the other week I was actually talking to a pretty big Instagram expert who's got like a membership program,
Mhm.
and we were talking about that idea, and he said one of the things that people don't understand is that, so he sells a membership site where it's a recurring monthly thing, and every month he adds value on how you can use platforms like Instagram.
Mhm.
And a lot of people are joining into programs like that, wanting to start their own passive income, whatever.
Mhm.
And he is very adamant of saying, look, I spent years offering the service as a one-on-one thing, and I
Mhm.
learned how to provide the service, which is allowing me to now understand how to provide that kind of value in this more recurring way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know we're kind of switching gears here, but
No, it's
that
totally
That's
good.
okay.
Yeah.
understanding that idea of like, if you want to get to that road to passive income, which is like so freaking hard, and like everybody's talking about it right now,
Mm-hmm.
like the people who are doing it the best way are first figuring out how to offer the services one-on-one as best as they can,
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of reverse engineer that service
Mm-hmm.
into something that can be more of a one-to-many type of product.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to all of the influencers and big names that we see and we know about. These
Yeah.
are folks that have been in the game for 7 to 10 years.
Yep.
Like Fortune, Forbes, they all talk about the 7-year success, 7-year overnight success. And I come from the fintech industry where like one of the gold standards in our industry is the Starbucks gift card, because the loyalty program and everything, Starbucks almost tossed that out because they couldn't figure it out. And it took them just over 7 years to finally see an ROI on that product. And all of a sudden it was like the biggest thing. And now no one can live without that like gold star like membership,
Yeah.
but no one looks back at how they tested, how they tried that, and we're kind of almost done with it. So I think I lost where I was going with that, but like to your point, the testing and working one-on-one and all of that stuff, that's the stuff people don't see. And I know the trend is right now, a lot of entrepreneurs are going into it like, this is going to be easy money and I'm going to work from my laptop in Thailand and do all these
Right.
luxurious things. And that can happen down the road.
Right.
But right now, like, it's going to be feeling feelings that you never expected to feel.
No, and one of those big feelings is being uncomfortable with putting stuff out there that you might not be super satisfied yourself with. And that's one of the things that I learned the hard way before I started my own business. I worked with a team of people who are working on some type of product, and they were so unwilling to put it out there until they felt like it was an A+ thing. And then when they finally were done, they launched it, and there were crickets, and
Yeah.
they didn't have a list, they didn't have anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think certain pockets of entrepreneurship understand that minimum viable product importance more so than others, but especially creatives, again, are so, and I get it, they're emotionally attached to what they do. They don't want to put out something that's not their best work.
Yeah.
But you have to get used to being uncomfortable and having like, this is a good enough thing to get done so that I can move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I mean,
like
sorry, I thought you were finished talking.
No. Sorry,
It's my bad.
I was kind of done, and then I was like, I should probably keep
talking. Keep talking.
It's so much easier said than done, and like I'm always catching myself not taking that advice.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to be like, oh, I've got this thing that I want to do, but I don't want to, but it's not quite done yet. Or I've got a marketing campaign that I haven't quite figured out all the details for, so I'm not going to start it yet. And that can just really stall your business.
I mean, it can be the death of your business. I worked with an entrepreneur back in the day where, I mean, really the backstory behind this podcast was this entrepreneur was like, I'm going to do a podcast. And he talked about it for over a year. And honestly, like as his employee, I got so frustrated. I was like, I can put a podcast out before you can. And
That's
then
awesome.
I did it. Like that frustration, like it helped me overcome my anxiety of putting stuff out there. Because if you would have asked me 2 years ago if I was the type of person that would have just like done all this, I would have said hell no. But like seeing that, I was like, it's possible, you can do it. It's not that hard. Jump and like it'll happen. And I put like the first 10 podcasts that are up, like still are awful. And I've considered pulling them, but it's like, well, that's the growth. You know, and that's kind of where the beauty is in terms of putting stuff that's ugly out there and being like, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but here we go. It's learning those lessons that you can't learn anywhere else.
Yeah, and there are very few things that you can do as a business owner that you can't fix.
Yes. Oh, I love that point.
Well, people,
Especially like as a lawyer, I'm seeing it all the time. People are like, well, I don't want to do this because what if whatever. And I'm like, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
If something bad happens, we can fix it, but you're going to be fine.
well, don't you think that kind of speaks to how hard change is on people and
Yeah.
what a scary thing it is to take steps? Because I know I work with clients all the time who aren't even entrepreneurs, right? I'm in mental health. And I
Yeah.
talk a lot about it's more about progress. It's not about perfection.
Mhm.
It's more about doing the activity, not getting it 100% right. And so I think there's this natural tendency that we all have to be like, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it.
Mhm.
But it's really anxiety kind of driving that, right? Don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. What's been really helpful for me is I was so burnt out by now I see it kind of as a blessing, but at the time I was working for this guy who wouldn't let me move on things because he
Mhm.
wasn't ready. And so I had all of this like pent up momentum
Mhm.
to just start moving. So
Yeah.
that when I started my own business, I was just like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and we're going to see
Mhm.
what happens. But I've learned that as long as I can stay excited about learning lessons and getting better,
Mhm.
that allows me to overcome a lot of those fears.
Mm-hmm.
Because as an example, like I hated the idea of speaking in front of people when I was younger.
Mhm.
Um, but I really loved improv.
Mm.
Okay.
And so I signed up for like a free improv class when I was in college and like did that a couple of times, and like that in a lot of ways has now really helped me um, do public speaking as a part of my legal profession.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And it's like what I love. I mean, I still get antsy every time I'm on stage, but this
Mm.
idea that I know I'm getting better and I can look back at how I did and what I've learned and how my next talk can be better than
Mhm.
the old one, like we're always improving. And as long as we can take that as a positive and
Mhm.
not just looking back at what sucked during our first 10 episodes of the podcast,
Yeah.
I think that that's good because I did the same thing. I actually, like, kudos to you guys. I was thinking about doing a podcast for my show when I started, and I knew that if I tried to do a podcast, I like would be in editing heaven for like hours at a time and would never do it. And so I ended up going down the Facebook Live route.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
One take. I couldn't fix it if I wanted to.
Yeah.
um, and and yeah, I think that executing and like you said, like having that progress over perfection mentality is huge, and it's also really healthy, like to take the pressure off of yourself.
Yes.
Mhm.
I had a um, I had a friend growing up who was uh, pretty significantly well. He had a very mild um, uh, intellectual disorder, but
Mhm.
it made him pretty significantly socially awkward.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And when we were in high school, he kept asking me questions about like, Joey, like how do I act in a situation when this happens or when this happens? Like he was trying to figure out just like a textbook how he should be acting in
Mhm.
situations.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point I was like, buddy, I am saying this out of like so much kindness, but nobody is watching you as hard as you think that they are.
Mhm.
Yes.
And like, I want that to be a very relieving thing for you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's true as
Absolutely.
business owners too. Like
Yeah.
our customers and our followers, like they're not paying attention to our business nearly as
Mhm.
much as we are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I tell folks with marketing stuff, like, because so many people are like, well, I don't want to repeat my same message. I don't want to
Yeah.
be boring. I don't want to be annoying and all that stuff. I'm like, you put 15 things out there, the person's going to see it once.
Yep.
It's fine. We have so many messages coming in. And I think to that piece of like no one's watching you as closely as you're watching yourself or your business, like that was the moment, like learning that was when I was able to start putting stuff out there because I struggled a lot with like performance anxiety and
Yep.
perfectionism and if everything's not exactly right, because I come from like the design world, right? So it's gotta
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
and it's just gotta be just right. And then once I realized like people barely care, then it's fine.
It's
I
really us that cares,
yeah.
right?
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and as entrepreneurs, especially like our business is our baby. You know, we put so much work into it. There is this emotional piece of, well, if someone says that it's off, then that means I did a bad job of raising it. Like we put
Mhm.
Yep.
personal value onto a business when really
Yeah.
like you mentioned boundaries, and I think that that is one of the biggest piece of boundaries that entrepreneurs kind of need to navigate.
Yeah. And it's hard because you like there's a difference between your like entrepreneurial spirit and like the energy and excitement that you get from being an entrepreneur, if that's like what excites you,
Mhm.
and the business. And yeah, like what you said, like um again, it's one of those easier said than done things, but
Yeah.
like I deal with a lot of clients who get nasty reviews
Mm.
and take it super personally, even though they have hundreds of amazing reviews.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And it's like you can't let the bad ones get to you. And you also, I think in order to do that, can't get too much like self congratulations from the good comments. Like you
Right.
can't allow that to define your worth either way. It
Yeah.
might
Mhm.
be a great signal for how the business is doing, but like there's a separation there between like your worth and your business's worth.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah.
exactly. Hey guys, Des here. I'm just popping in with a quick message for all of you entrepreneurs and side hustlers out there. Are you ready to grow your business so you have real influence so that when you speak, people don't just listen, they actually do something? Do you want to be able to share your message, product, or service in a way that feels truly authentic to you so you can stand out from the crowd? Are you ready to finally be a true leader in your industry? If so, then it's time you signed up for the free Legendary Leadership Challenge. In just 5 days, you will be able to define your leadership style, develop a whole new way to view all the things on your to do list so you're not overwhelmed, create consistent, standout content, increase your community engagement and connections, like real, actual connections, and redefine self care so you can keep doing all the things you're made to do. If you're ready to rise up as the legendary leader you know you are, then head on over to DesireeW.com and click on the Legendary Leadership Challenge and sign up today. And when you sign up for the challenge, you also get 5 free days to all of the content in the Legendary Leadership Society. Guys, it's nuts. So, if you're ready to learn how to lead your way, take the Legendary Leadership Challenge today.
What do you think has helped you to have those boundaries the most? I know you said it was something you really had to learn. What do you
Yeah.
think helps you to kind of hold those boundaries in
Mhm.
place?
Oh, that's a really good question. I had they um I I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. I am one of those really annoying people who, if I read a book, I think it's gospel. Like I think it's
Mm,
truth.
okay.
And if I read a book the next time that says the complete opposite, I like so agree with that other book.
Mm,
Mm.
And so like I get very deeply like I really believe people who
Mhm.
tell me things.
yeah.
Right.
And so in the very short term, that's very dangerous
Mhm.
Sure.
because I can just kind of drink whatever Kool-Aid is in front of me.
Right.
Hmm.
But over time, I've been able to very, very quickly dilute the Kool-Aid by bouncing around and that pendulum swinging back and forth so quickly. And
Mhm.
so I'm able to like I've gotten to a point where I'm like, okay, this is true about that, and this is a takeaway here. And kind of being a sponge in that way has been really helpful.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But being willing to be open when you are new to something,
Mhm.
and I am like to a fault very aware of like when I'm in a new situation and I'm like the dumbest person in the room. And so I was latching on to the best people I saw in the room. And then over time realized that there were better people to be latching onto.
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
think that's the way that your business has to grow, is that you make the best out of the relationships that you have. And if over time your like top 5 changes and evolves, like that's just a part of being in business and it's natural. And going back to what you said, like you shouldn't feel bad personally about dropping a business relationship that's no longer helping you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. By the way, I can tell you've been to grad school. You're super open and you're like, this is good about that, and this is good about that, and this is good about that. I'm like, oh yeah, we have that
Right?
too.
I know. In law school, it was when you actually take the time to read Supreme Court cases, it's super interesting because especially nowadays, they're actually very, very readable. Like they write these cases hoping that like a third grader can read and understand them.
Oh,
Nice.
I didn't know
But
that.
when you read the powerful ones that have like dissenting opinions and all of these other opinions, it's like you read one and you're like, yep, that's the right way to view this thing. And then you flip through the other opinion and you're like, no, that's the right way. Like, are these actually looking at the same set of facts? And just realizing, it also helped me realize like how very smart people can come to different conclusions on things. And so it's very hard for me to think that like any influence out there is like just completely off the mark. Like like I think that like Gary Vaynerchuk is amazing. I don't listen to him very often and I agree with most of what he says, but I also know that like he's walking his own talk, but in a way, and for anybody who's not familiar with Gary Vee, I'm sorry, but he gives a lot of entrepreneurial help.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he doesn't get paid for giving entrepreneurial help. And so he can get away with giving away that kind of free content. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs that follow him mistake what he's saying for give away all of your best content that you're being paid for free. And people are just misjudging that. And so that's one of the big issues. I mean, if we really want to get like nuts and boltsy, I think that for a business to figure out what type of information and recommendations they want to share publicly versus what you have to pay for to get access to is a really difficult thing for businesses to figure out.
Of course.
And I think too much in either direction can be hard, and it's very industry specific. But there's no one right way to run a business, but two, like there's so many ways to get you to success. And that's also what's hard as an entrepreneur, is sometimes I feel like there's one way to get there and I have to find out what it is and then I have to follow it. When like the reality is like, if I just like actually followed the path that one person told me to take, I'd probably see results.
Yeah, that was honestly one reason why we started doing what we do, is because we start working with like the person first, and we do like the Fast at 5 and all of that to really get an understanding of their strengths. Because you're right, there are a million ways to get to all of the success you want. But if you're doing something that's not in line with how you operate, and if you're just following like the latest and greatest guru, you might not get there. Or it might be a lot harder than it needs to be.
Or you might get there and feel really dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Like, this doesn't feel as great as I thought it would, you know? And I know I've talked about this before, but when you learn how to be a therapist, I don't know about when you learn how to be a lawyer, but when you learn how to be a therapist, they do not show you how to do it. They just are kind of like, you practice, because
they know, at least at the school I went to and the school we went to,
Mhm.
because they know if they show you, you'll just do it that way. And you have to find your own voice as a therapist, because like Des and I can do the same things, but it'll look different because our styles are different. The
Yeah.
way we approach people is different, but they're both valid and true, right? Because we're using like evidence-based principles. So as long as we're true to those principles, it'll look your way. But developing that is kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
In the
Oh my
beginning.
gosh, I love that. I wish
Yeah.
that law school training. That's really cool.
Yeah. I'm like, why don't you just show me how to do this thing? They're like, nope,
Nope, don't do
you
it.
just
That
have
is
to.
aggravating.
I know.
That is really aggravating. But
Yeah.
at least they like walk you through it.
Yeah.
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 Law school is just like read these books for 3 years and then figure out how to find a job.
Oh my goodness. Oh man.
Well, up until that point, I've always been like, I could have probably been a lawyer. Nope, I would have dropped out.
No, you probably could have been a lawyer. The most, I have a lot of friends who are, it's very common to be a lawyer who doesn't want to be a lawyer right now.
Okay.
So you made a fine decision.
Well, actually, like, let's speak to that. Like, I do want to kind of speak to some of your professional expertise.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you need to get that, you can.
No,
Okay.
sorry.
Um,
Sorry, that shouldn't have happened.
no
It's
worries.
okay.
I'm like,
It's fine.
okay, whatever.
So I spent 2 years after law school working at a firm that was great people, not a really good fit for me. And slowly I started to think that the fact that that firm wasn't a good fit for me, that area of practice wasn't a good fit, that meant that I was just not cut out to be a lawyer. And so before I had the guts to actually leave the firm, I was doing a lot of research, and I found that a lot of lawyers are not happy. Suicide rate is, I think, second highest for lawyers, second to like dentists.
I was going to say dentist, second to dentist.
I still don't understand the dentist.
Because everybody hates going to the dentist. So you have to live with people dreading seeing you.
Yes, you're perpetually like hated by everyone.
And every time you walk in the room, people are just like, oh my God. Not that I've been a dentist, but that's how it's been portrayed to me.
I think that's so interesting because I mean, I hate getting my teeth done, but like, there's no animosity towards the person.
Yeah, no.
So it's like everyone hates the dentist, not the actual person dentist. Just this concept of dentist.
They hate the idea of what you are.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
But not the person, not like
because a lot of people
George
like,
the
don't
dentist.
like lawyers. Like there aren't like dentist jokes.
That's fair.
True.
Well, that's why lawyers are second.
Right?
Yeah. And so I was pretty close to like just finding a job that wasn't legal related at all. But there are a lot of I think people in the space trying to call out the issue. And one of the books that I read during that phase of my life was The Happiness Advantage.
I haven't read it.
Sean Aker. And he talks about kind of the nitty gritty science behind happiness and kind of things that you can do to become happier. And he talked about how a school had invited him to talk at their wellness week. And he was like, great, like what's going to be the topic of conversation? They're like, well, we're going to talk about like handling depression one day, and the next day, like what anxiety is and like how to cope with these things if you have them. And he was like, well, it sounds like this isn't a wellness week, it's a sickness week. And you're just speaking to put band-aids on the problems instead of actually trying to like fix the problem. And I think the legal profession, like I'm sure a lot of other professions that are stress prone, there's a lot coming out now about like, this is health and wellness month, and we're going to talk about things that you can do and things like that.
Right.
And like meditation and gratitude exercises and talking to a therapist are great things.
Yeah.
And I think everybody should go to a therapist. I love mine. But there's a deeper problem if so many people in your industry have that high of a need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see how industries change. But I am, especially now that I had that experience with the panic attack in the hospital, it's how can I I started my own business. So the stress that I feel, like I can control that in some ways. So what can I do to create a business and a team culture and a client experience that is relieving a lot of that stress? And a lot of that is identifying and saying no to red flag clients.
Yes, sure. That makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. To the point about like the profession piece, it just got me thinking, like, I was reading this one article about how the medical field is kind of dealing with it or trying to deal with it, because suicide rates for folks going through med school are significantly higher than like they should be. And there's like one group that's like, we need to address the problem systematically. And then there's this like old guard pushback where it's, if we lighten up on stuff, then all of these like precautions and like the whole system's just essentially going to fall. Like if we don't put them through the ringer, then people aren't going to get the care that they like rightfully deserve. Like there's a really interesting like conversation of, well, how do we weed people out and how do we let people be human? You know?
I don't think it's either or, right? Whenever we get caught in these either ors, it's like these ultimatums. It's this or it's that.
Yeah.
Well, it's usually neither one of those extreme things. It's more somewhere in the middle. Somewhere in the middle somewhere. And so it's like, how do you find balance there? And it may not be directly in the middle. I talk about that all the time. Like 50-50 sounds super boring. It doesn't have to be 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah. Balance can look very different.
Oh, I like that. And also, like, as an attorney, I deal with a lot of business owners who have stresses and fears. And I learned both through my experience, but also through like my own counseling and the therapy that I've been seeing, is that a lot of our biggest fears are just things that we're afraid of that haven't happened yet. And it's how can you kind of manage and understand that you're worried about things that haven't happened yet, especially as a business owner. Like there's so many what ifs out there that can, again, that they can affect your execution. They can affect how successful the business is, and they can affect your mindset. And so what can you do to kind of keep those fears at bay, or kind of lean into them to really identify what it is you're upset about or afraid of, so that you can pinpoint it and then keep moving? Because like from what I've seen, like the businesses that are consistent in the right way and are to an extent just kind of keeping their head down and following a path that they've carved out, or following through on a strategy that they've planned, that's where like the magic happens. And so many people get derailed because they start worrying about things, or they're not seeing immediate results from something. And so a lot of their plans just don't get fully executed on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a really good point.
Derailed by anxiety. I talk about it a lot. Like, you can't problem solve things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah.
Because you're trying to problem solve something that isn't even in existence.
Right.
So that's kind of a fruitless place to focus your efforts. And so a better way, this is kind of exactly what you're saying. Like a better way is, what is really bothering me? Well, I have to problem solve these things because what I'm really upset about is, what if I fail?
Right.
So then it's really working on that. And getting back to that core issue and figuring out what you can control and what you can't, and managing that and moving forward.
Love it.
Well, that's what you said.
I know, but you therapists, you're so amazing at like saying what I say better than I say.
I did want to circle back around to the transitioning from, I'm sorry, I forget what type of lawyer you were before you started your practice, but
yeah, it was litigation, medical malpractice.
Okay. Can you speak to like the transition of how you kind of found your flow and everything of focusing on working with creatives? Because I think that's such an amazing focus that so few people would have ever thought of.
Yeah. So it definitely was not like a fully intentional strategic move at all. I mean, in the legal world, there are pretty much two buckets of how you can be a lawyer. You can either be a lawyer on the litigation side and you can be in the courtroom, or you can be a transactional lawyer who deals with contracts and things.
Okay.
Or at least that's kind of what law school makes you think. You can do a lot more with a law degree, but those are kind of the two big things. And so since I was realizing that I didn't really want to be a litigator, I was looking at transactional opportunities, and very quickly met up with attorneys that were in the startup space. So they do a lot of what I do, but they work specifically with people who would identify more as startups or tech startups. And so a lot of clients from other states, some other countries who are looking for like privacy policies in terms of use that they want on their website. Like maybe they're building some type of a platform. Like let's say like they were trying to build like a therapy platform where you could go on this website and connect, you know, patients with potential therapists. They were creating those marketplaces. And I was working out counsel with those attorneys for a number of months, and I realized that the work was really complicated because each client had a very different business model with very specific things that they wanted. And in a lot of cases, they were bootstrapped businesses that hadn't launched yet. And so they had these specific needs, and they didn't really, they weren't generating any revenue yet. There wasn't anything that we could do beyond that. And so I eventually realized that working with the startups wasn't really for me, just because they were very kind of one-off clients. It was hard to build like a relationship with them after doing just the one thing. And so I randomly just met a business coach who, as soon as we started talking, she was like, "Have you thought about marketing directly to handmade sellers on Etsy?" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, there's a market there." And then I learned about this kind of larger creative industry with not just makers, but service providers as well. And I learned that there was just a lot of opportunity there, and I loved working with those types of clients. I'm definitely not the only attorney in this space. Like there are a lot of attorneys that call themselves attorneys for creatives, and we all, for the most part, I think we all kind of know and like each other and have our own little flavors of how we do business. But I think I'm one of the only guys in the space, and I need to be careful here. But I think that it's very unfortunate that women have been groomed in a professional setting to kind of have to be very kind of hard skinned as a professional in order to kind of climb up the ladder. And so what we're seeing now is a lot of female attorneys have been trained and groomed to be kind of like the bitch in the courtroom, because that is what law school and everything has kind of told them that they need to be commanding in the space.
Yeah, that's the model,
And
right?
yeah, and I absolutely know that not every female attorney or every female professional is like that.
Sure.
But it's also more common for men in general to kind of have that type of a feeling and approach. And so when I saw this as an opportunity and people saw me as an approachable attorney who just happened to be a guy, I think there was almost a level of comfort from a lot of the female clients that I have there that were like, there's something about the fact that you're a guy who I feel comfortable talking to that makes you that builds an even better and deeper like trust factor. And so I didn't think about that as like a thing, but it's become something that it's really fun being like the only guy in the room. I work in a lot of most, if not all, female circles, and I can really sympathize with and identify with the it seems right now, and I'm sure it'll kind of morph over time, but we're seeing a lot of female in this creative space and then a lot of men in this tech space.
Mm-hmm.
And just generally speaking, the creative space has such a bigger heart behind the business, whereas the tech space is, it's like a smart and good idea that they like want vendor, like they want an investor, and like they like, it's a totally different space. And so I just, for me, and going back to like mindset and health, like I would much rather have a pool of clients that are super passionate about what they're doing, that see their attorney as somebody who is giving them a lot of peace of mind over, like you said, their baby, versus somebody who is going to be affordable and cheap and smart and tell them as little as they need to know to move forward, and then maybe help them with a patent or something once they get big.
Well,
They're just very different stereotypes.
But I also think it speaks to the power of your ability to invest in relationships, to invest in building with your clients versus just doing the business. You know what I mean? Like that human piece that I think gets overlooked, and I don't think anyone's even necessarily always capable of doing it, right? But you have that very personable, caring, compassionate voice and place that you come from, and that resonates with people.
Well, and speaking from personal experience, and this is just like an N of one, but I was recently speaking with a lawyer about some stuff, and the amount of emotion and the amount of, I know this isn't super pertinent, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's kind of like a therapy session right now. Like I hung up and I was like, oh, I never realized the fact that maybe shopping around for lawyers may be good because of that connection. Because I like put all this stuff out on the table and was just like met with a very like cold response, and was just like, well, sounds like a shark, but also I know I would just be like another billable, you know? And like, I think the ability to connect with somebody on just like the next level beyond a billable would be really nice, you know, like on some sort of human level. So
absolutely. And what you guys do is like, you guys have that so ingrained into what you do, which is awesome.
Thanks.
That's what we were trained in how to do. My whole business is relationships with people.
Tammy, did you have any other questions, or?
No, you stole my question.
Oh, sorry. Well, where can folks find you? All across the interwebs.
Sure. So you can find me online at indielaw.com is my firm. And then you can find me on Instagram at Joey Vitale. Our firm, we do a lot of things, but trademarks are really our jam. Trademarks, especially for emotion-driven, creative small business owners, is a huge foundational piece of their business, and it's a really misunderstood legal topic. So we just launched a free crash course on trademarks. It's a 3-video series, and I can give you guys a link to that if you'd like.
We'll put it in the notes. Send it our way.
For sure.
Sweet.
Cool. All right, Joey, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
it's been great. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. If you guys like what we're doing, please subscribe, leave a rating, share it with your friends. It would mean the world to us. If you're not a huge fan of what we're doing, maybe share it with someone you think may like it. If you want to keep up to date on all of the Sugar and Spikes shenanigans, get the behind-the-scenes tour of life and business as a millennial female entrepreneur, then follow me across all the social medias. I'm Dez W, Ms. MBA. DEZWMSMBA across all the platforms, your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Instagrams. I'm there, same name. And don't forget, if you're ready to rise up as a legendary leader, you know you are, then head on over to DesireeW.com and sign up for the free 5-day Legendary Leadership Challenge. Also, I want to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song Move Along as our theme music. And guys, remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.